I can still remember the way the fog curled along the edges of the old mansion's windows, thick and restless, like it had a mind of its own. The wind whispered through the twisted trees outside, carrying with it faint echoes of laughter, or maybe cries. I could never be sure. I stepped closer, my breath visible in the pale, flickering light of the candle I carried, each heartbeat louder than the last. The wooden floorboards groaned under my weight, echoing down empty hallways lined with peeling wallpaper and cold shadows. Somewhere deep inside, I heard the faint hum of a tune I didn't recognize, though no one had played anything in years. I wanted to leave, to step back into the warmth of the night beyond the gates, but some force, gentle yet insistent, drew me further into the mansion's heart. That's when I saw it. The house was silent, almost too silent, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes the air taste thick. I stepped into the main hall. Wood groaned under my weight. Paint peeled in curling strips, flaking under my fingertips. A cold draft brushed my neck, soft, insistent. It carried the faintest whisper, almost a name, or maybe just the memory of one. Shadows gathered in corners. They flickered when I moved, then stretched long and pale along the walls. I couldn't tell if they belonged to me or to the house. The air smelled of dust, old timber, and something coppery. Metal, faint but sharp. It clung to my tongue when I breathed. I followed the hallway. Each step echoed like a quiet pulse, and the whispers grew. Not words I could understand. Names I didn't know. Soft murmurs curling around me, brushing against my ribs, my ears. A door creaked, slowly, and then opened. I froze. The room beyond was darker than the hall, but somehow alive. Shadows moved across the walls as if watching, waiting. I stepped inside. The floor was cold beneath my bare hands as I brushed along the walls. The whispers multiplied, tiny voices overlapping, breathing around me. I felt a draft swirl in from nowhere. It lifted my hair pressed against my cheek. The shadows shivered, then froze. A name slipped through the air. I didn't recognize it. It lingered on my tongue, heavy and metallic. I traced the walls slowly, careful not to disturb. Whatever it was that lived here. Corners seemed to move when I looked away. The house shifted subtly with each heartbeat. My fingers brushed the edge of a table. It felt colder than the rest, like ice hidden under dust. I pulled my hand back. The whispers circled closer. Not threatening, curious. Soft footsteps in the emptiness, just beyond my own. I turned to leave. The door I had entered swung shut on its own. A hush fell, deeper than before. The walls seemed to lean in, listening. I felt eyes on me. Not human. Not visible, but heavy. I pushed the door open. The hall stretched before me, still and quiet. The shadows were gone, or hiding. Every step back to the entrance was measured, careful. The whispers faded into the walls themselves. But the metallic taste lingered. I reached the front door. A last cold breath brushed my neck. I felt watched until I stepped outside. The house didn't move. It didn't speak. Yet something stayed behind. And I knew, even as I walked away, it would remember me. The stairs groaned under my weight. Dust rose in soft clouds with every step. The attic hatch waited at the top, silent, almost expectant. I pushed it open. A pale sliver of light fell across forgotten trunks and sheets draped over furniture. Everything smelled of age, old wood, and damp fabric, a heavy sweetness that clung to my nose. The air was still, too still. And yet I heard it, a faint rustling from the far corner where no draft could reach. I crouched low, moving closer. Shadows stretched across the rafters like reaching fingers. They trembled when I paused, then retreated when I breathed too loudly. The attic hummed, soft, like a lullaby whispered just beyond comprehension. It pressed against my chest, a quiet vibration in my bones. I traced my fingers along a dusty trunk. The metal corners were cold, biting into my skin through the fabric gloves I wore. The rustling paused, almost as if waiting. I leaned closer to the corner. The shadows bent, curling along the beams. They whispered in motion, stretching and shrinking with the flicker of the pale light. A chest sat beneath the smallest window, ancient and heavy. Its lock was rusted, but the lid moved with ease when I nudged it. The air inside smelled of damp paper and something metallic. I leaned over to peer inside. A sudden cold grazed my neck. No wind, no one. Only the chill, lingering like a touch left too long. The hum deepened. I could feel it in my ears, pressing gently, insistently. It carried voices I could almost recognize, yet couldn't understand. Shadows pooled around the chest. They leaned toward me, their edges sharp, reaching, but never solid. I held my breath, and the attic held its own. The rustling resumed, quieter this time. A soft scraping like fingers moving along wood grain. I froze, tasting dust in my mouth, feeling it settle on my tongue. I lifted the chest lid fully. Nothing moved inside. Yet the air felt heavier, denser, as though the chest itself was breathing. A whisper brushed my ear. I couldn't place a word. Only the sensation of being known. I leaned back, my hands trembling. Shadows recoiled and stretched simultaneously. The lullaby hummed lower now, almost satisfied. I touched the trunk again. Its surface pulsed faintly under my fingers. I imagined shapes within the darkness moving independently, living in the folds of dust and shadow. The attic felt smaller. Walls leaned closer, breathing with me. The light flickered through the small window, painting fleeting figures across the rafters. I backed toward the hatch. The rustling followed, delicate, teasing. Soft footsteps on creaking boards, though I was alone. I reached the stairs. The hum faded, leaving a silence that pressed against my skin. The shadows lingered in the corners, curling just beyond sight. I looked back once. The chest sat quietly, waiting. And for a moment I could have sworn it. Watched. The attic hatch closed behind me. The sound echoed, swallowed almost immediately. The rustling ceased, but the memory of the cold, the hum, and the stretching shadows remained. I felt their fingers brush along my thoughts as I descended, and I knew the attic was not done with me. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of old wood and something metallic. Moonlight filtered through the cracked windows, pale and trembling across the floorboards. I stepped into the hallway, careful, my footsteps soft against the worn wood. The wallpaper moved, or it seemed to. Faded patterns rippled like water, twisting just at the edge of vision. I could feel it brush against my senses, alive and watching. A hum rose faintly from the walls. Not loud, not steady, just enough to press against my ears, making the silence heavier. At the far end, a figure lingered. Dim, pale, motionless. Its eyes caught mine, deep and still, and my chest tightened. I froze. Breath shallow, taste metallic on my tongue. Every instinct whispered to move, but I couldn't. The floor creaked behind me. I hadn't shifted. Nothing had moved. Shadows gathered along the edges of the hallway, curling closer to the light. The wallpaper flickered again like skin over bone, twisting and sighing. I blinked. The figure was gone. Only the pale light remained, stretching across the boards, empty and quiet. The hum lingered, soft now, almost teasing. I ran my hand along the wall. It was cool, rough with peeling paper, but somehow waiting. Every step I took seemed to echo, though the hall swallowed sound. The corners deepened, shadows thickening with a slow, deliberate intent. I glanced back. Nothing moved. Yet the sense of being observed pressed against my neck, my spine, my fingertips. A floorboard creaked again, soft, deliberate, like someone pacing just beyond sight. I held my breath. The hum dipped as though listening. I edged forward, eyes flicking to the walls, the ceiling, the spaces between. The moonlight felt warmer now, but it couldn't reach the figure, or the memory of it. I stopped mid-hall. The air was heavy, thick with static that crawled over my skin. Even my shadow seemed to hesitate, stretched thin across the boards. A pulse of silence. The walls whispered faintly. I thought I could hear my own name, but it dissolved before it reached clarity. I turned. Nothing. The hallway was just pale light, wallpaper, and shadows curling back into corners. I moved again. Each step measured, cautious. The hum followed, persistent, alive, yet impossible to trace. By the time I reached the door at the end, the figure had vanished entirely. No trace left, just the echo of its eyes lingering in the back of my mind. The moonlight pooled on the floorboards, quiet, waiting. I exhaled slowly. The hallway stretched on, pale and empty, but nothing felt the same. The shadows shifted in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. I felt the brush of unseen eyes across my back as I turned away. The silence pressed close and I walked into it. Each step carried the memory of the figure, the creaking floor, the rippling walls. Even when I left the hallway, even when I closed the door behind me, the pale light remained. Stretching, watching, waiting. The kitchen smelled of something long gone. Roasted meat, sugar, something sweet. But it was faint, like memory pressed into the cracked tiles. Moonlight spilled across the counters, pale and trembling. The cupboards sagged with age and dust shimmered in the light. The air was warm, oddly warm, though the windows were all closed. A hum drifted from the pantry. Soft, repeating, rising and falling like a breath. I froze, listening. The floorboards groaned under my weight. I stepped closer, hand hovering over the pantry door. The hum continued, gentle, persistent, echoing off the tiles. I opened the door slowly. Empty. Nothing moved. But the humming remained. It was not coming from a person. Not from anything I could see. It wrapped around the room, curling across the counters, brushing my skin. The smell of old food grew faintly stronger, as if responding to it. A chill brushed my neck despite the warmth. I leaned closer, peering into the darkness of the pantry. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching up the walls. The hum pulsed in time with my heartbeat. Or maybe it was the other way around. The tiles beneath my feet felt smooth, sticky with a time I could not place. The cupboards whispered faintly, hinges sighing under some unseen weight. I could taste iron in my mouth. The hum rose slightly, then dropped, flowing through the room like wind through trees. I wanted to step back, but something rooted me to the spot. Curiosity, unease, something beyond fear. A drawer slid open on its own. Nothing inside, just a black space that seemed deeper than it should. The humming wrapped around it, rising again, delicate, insistent. I drew a slow breath. The air was heavy, vibrating against my chest. I felt it move through my hair, brush my fingers, curl around the corners of my eyes. I tried to pinpoint it, follow it. It slipped past, always ahead, always behind. Not a creature. Not a person. The very air hummed. I stepped back from the pantry, heart whispering in my ears. The hum followed, climbing the walls, echoing off the counters. The smell of old meals drifted faintly stronger, sweet, decaying, familiar. I turned slowly, tracing the lines of the kitchen. Shadows stretched toward me, but none were solid. Each surface seemed to ripple slightly, responding to the sound I could not see. I touched the countertop. Cold. Smooth. Yet the hum pressed against my fingertips, vibrating faintly, alive. I exhaled. The humming softened, curling around the corners, receding like a tide. The warmth in the room faded just slightly, leaving a thin, uneasy chill. The tiles gleamed in the moonlight, still, silent. I left the pantry door open. The hum continued, faint, distant, yet close enough to brush my ear. It seemed to linger in the spaces between walls, between breath, between thought. I stepped back, careful. The air felt heavy with memory, with something remembered but unnamed. Even as I walked toward the hall, the kitchen seemed alive, waiting, watching. The humming stayed, soft, endless, not from a person, not from anything visible, but from the room itself. And I knew, in that quiet, stretched moment, that the kitchen had never been empty. Not really. The guest room smelled of old linen and cold wood. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, thin and pale, brushing the floor with silver. I lay still, listening. Footsteps moved beneath the floorboards. Slow, deliberate, echoing like a pulse in the room. No rhythm I could follow. No pattern. Just a presence. I tapped my fingers on the floor. They paused. A heartbeat of silence stretched between the boards and me. I whispered, barely audible, asking who was there. No reply, only the faint creak of settling wood. The air smelled faintly of dust and something metallic, like iron. The footsteps resumed, softer now, gliding under the floor. I felt them move beneath me, beneath my hands, beneath my chest. The mattress felt heavier, pressing down, yet I was aware of nothing touching me. I shifted slightly, breath shallow, listening for any change. A soft knock resonated from inside the wall itself. Not the door, not the window. Inside the wall, it vibrated through my fingertips into my ribs. The air grew colder, brushing my neck. The shadows in the corners stretched toward me. I could feel them curling along the edges of the room. The hum of silence grew heavier, denser. I lay still, humming in my ears a quiet static from the darkness. The floorboards groaned under some unseen weight. I felt hollow, as if the house itself had drawn something out of me, a whisper of wood, soft and close. Then nothing. Then the footsteps started again, just beneath the mattress now, softer, closer. Each step deliberate, patient. I tried to sit up, but the shadows seemed to lean in. A chill traced my spine, cold fingers brushing along my skin. The smell of old wood and faint decay pressed into my nose, I whispered again. The room held its breath. The wall seemed to breathe with me, slowly, rhythmically. The knocking returned, soft, deep. Each tap resonated in my chest, in my skull, in the silence. I realized the house was alive, moving under me, around me, within me. I pressed my hand to the floor, feeling the vibrations. Footsteps paused. A weight shifted in the room unseen. I exhaled, shallow, taste metallic on my tongue. Time stretched. I counted heartbeats, shadows, the hum of the walls. The moonlight flickered through the curtains, pale and cold. I shivered, though no draft passed. By morning, the house was silent. The floorboards no longer whispered. The walls no longer tapped. Yet I felt hollow. Something had stayed behind. Something had followed me, settled in the empty spaces of my chest. The room looked the same, yet I had changed. Alone, exposed, and still, if I close my eyes, I can hear it. Soft footsteps beneath the floorboards. The hallway smelled of old wood and faint dust. Moonlight spilled across the cracked floorboards, pale and trembling. A mirror leaned against the wall, fractured lines cutting through its surface. I stopped. The glass reflected more than I expected. My reflection lingered, watching, waiting. Even as I stood still, I shifted my weight. The reflection did not. It stayed. Faint smile curling across a pale face that should have mirrored me. Shadows stretched behind it, reaching outward like ink in water. I felt the air cool, brush against my arms, my neck like cold fingers trailing softly. I reached toward the glass. A brush of chill grazed my skin. I froze. The reflection's eyes glimmered faintly, a slow, deliberate wink. I had not moved. The hallway seemed longer. The floorboards hummed beneath my feet, though no one else was there. The smell of old polish and damp wood filled the air. I leaned closer, trying to focus on the cracks. Each fracture shifted subtly, dark tendrils reaching toward me from the edges. The mirror vibrated with quiet energy, a soft, static hum in the silence. I stepped back, feeling my pulse in my throat. The reflection remained motionless, smiling faintly. And I realized it knew I could not look away. The shadows behind the glass flickered, curling toward my hands. I tried to pull mine back. A soft pressure lingered on my arm, like a memory brushing past skin. The air tasted metallic, a faint tang of fear lingering with each shallow breath. I whispered, almost inaudible, a question I knew had no answer. The mirror did not respond. The shadows did not pause. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, the reflection's smile deepened. Not in time with me, not in sync. It was alive, separate, patient. The hallway light seemed to dim. The cracks in the glass stretched farther, dark veins crawling toward my feet. I stepped back again, heart thundering. Every movement watched, mirrored yet not mirrored. A soft hum vibrated in the air. The silence pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating. The mirror remained. The shadowy edges crept along the wall. I dared a hand to touch it again. Cold, solid, but not solid. Fingers met something that was not there, yet left a chill crawling up my arm. The reflection winked again. And I understood. It did not belong to me. It had waited. It had been patient. I turned, moving slowly down the hall. Each step echoed softly on the floorboards. The mirror stayed behind, smiling, shadows curling in its fractured corners. I could feel it watching, even as I moved away, even as the hallway swallowed me in darkness and stillness. By the time I reached the next doorway, the moonlight had shifted. The reflection was still there, the cracks like fingers reaching, waiting, and I knew I would feel its gaze long after I left the corridor behind. The master bedroom was still. Night pressed against the windows, pale and heavy. I struck a match. The candle flickered. Shadows danced along the walls, thin and quick. The flame jumped, though the air held no breath. I watched. Tiny shapes darted just beyond my vision, flitting in the corners of the glow. They were fleeting, delicate, almost laughing in the dark. The wax smelled faintly of old pine. Warmth from the flame brushed my fingers. But the room felt colder, heavier, as if holding its breath. I sensed it before I saw it. A presence leaning close near my shoulder. Words whispered, soft, slipping past comprehension. I tilted my head. The candle trembled. Its light stretched across the ceiling, and for a heartbeat the shadows gathered, bending, reaching. I leaned forward. The tiny figures disappeared. The whispers grew, closer, patient, knowing. The candle guttered. A smell of smoke and damp wax filled the air. Darkness began to creep along the edges of the room. I froze. The shadows pulsed in the dim glow, lingering at the corners of my sight. A cold pressure brushed along my neck, soft, deliberate. I tried to steady my breathing. The flame danced again, wildly, violently, though the room remained still. Shapes flickered, half-seen, restless, teasing the edge of vision. I whispered half-formed thoughts. The presence leaned closer. The words were gone almost as soon as they arrived, slipping through the air like water. The candle shivered. A whisper of wind, or maybe a hand, rippled over my skin. The figures froze, then scattered in a flurry of tiny darkness. And then the light died. The wick hissed softly, guttered. The room vanished into shadow. Silence fell, thick and heavy. I could feel the presence still, hovering just beyond my awareness. The air tasted faintly metallic, sharp against my tongue. I strained my eyes. Nothing moved, yet something remained. The darkness was alive, patient, watching. I dared not breathe too loudly. The quiet was endless, swallowing the room, swallowing me. Soft footsteps, imagined or real, pressed near. I felt the warmth of the candle gone. Cold had taken it, filling every corner, every shadowed crevice. The whispers lingered just at the edge of hearing, unspeakable and calm. And I stayed, alone in the dark. The flame, the figures, the presence, all vanished, yet all remained. The night closed around me, a silence that moved, a fear that did not speak, but only waited. The hallway stretched long and pale under the moonlight. Wallpaper curled at the edges, faintly yellowed. The floorboards hummed beneath each step. At the end of the corridor stood a door, iron-bound, ancient, solid. Its surface was scarred, cold to the touch. I stopped. A soft scratching began from within, rhythmic, patient, slow. I pressed my palm against the wood. The metal was icy, almost biting through my skin. The scratches continued, deliberate, waiting. I drew back. Breath caught in my chest. I imagined what could dwell behind the door. The sound halted abruptly. In its place, a sigh rose, soft, long, like the house itself exhaling. It drifted across the hallway, brushing my cheek. I stepped closer. Fingers hovered near the lock, trembling. Something inside shifted, just out of sight, just out of understanding. A faint smell of dust and old iron curled around the hinges. The wooden frame felt alive under my fingertips, subtle vibrations beneath the surface. I dared not breathe too deeply. The scratching began again, faint, echoing softly, then paused. Then a whisper of movement, like curtains stirring in a still room. I stepped back. Cold air pressed against my neck. Shadows pooled at the edges of the hallway. I thought of turning the handle, of opening the door to see, but something rooted me to the floor, heavy, patient. A soft sigh came again, slower this time, It carried weight, a presence, and something like regret. The silence that followed was thick, waiting, alive. I leaned close once more, fingers grazing the metal. The scratching paused, then began again further back in the darkness. I realized the door was not simply closed. It was guarding. It had chosen to remain unseen. Sometimes I think at night it opens itself. A faint creak along the hinges. A shadow slipping into the hallway before vanishing again. I never opened it. And yet, the air outside the door still moves differently. Cold, heavy, waiting. I step away. The hallway stretches silently behind me. The door stands firm, patient, untouched. The scratching fades, but I feel it linger in the walls. A memory of sound or a promise. Something waiting, and I leave the hallway behind. The house exhales. The door hums quietly in the darkness. The staircase rose before me, pale light spilling from the landing above. Wood worn smooth, edges chipped. Each step whispered under my weight. I paused. A faint creak answered me from behind. Then another. Matching mine exactly, I swallowed. The air felt heavy, thick with dust and something older. A faint chill brushed my neck. Step by step, I climbed. The echo followed, unbroken, deliberate. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. The wooden banister felt cold beneath my fingers. I traced its grooves, worn from years of hands that were not mine. Still, the footsteps continued behind me, impossibly close. Halfway up, the stairwell seemed to stretch. Shadows pooled in the corners, moving with a mind of their own. I could smell the faint tang of old wood and something faintly metallic. I stopped. The echo halted for a heartbeat, then resumed, louder this time, climbing higher. A presence, patient, waiting. I reached the top. The hallway was empty, pale light spilling across cracked tiles. No one waited. Only silence, but the echo did not stop. It grew louder, closer, even though no one was there. I pressed my hand to my chest. Heart racing. Breath shallow. I turned to descend. The echo followed. Every step mirrored mine. Slow, deliberate. I broke into a run. Wood groaning beneath my feet, each step amplified. The echo matched me. Relentless. Unyielding. I burst into the main hall. Empty. The echo still climbed behind me. Fading only when I stopped, then returning when I dared move again. The house exhaled around me. Dust swirled in pale light. The staircase stood silent, patient, as if it had never known my weight. I leaned against the wall. Cold, rough beneath my fingers. The echo faded finally, but left a tremor in the air. Alone, I realized the sound had never been footsteps. It had been something older. Something waiting for each step I would take. I did not move again. The staircase watched. And I listened, still, as the house settled around me. The library stretched before me, shadows pooling between towering shelves. Dust motes floated in the pale afternoon light, drifting slowly, like tiny ghosts. The air smelled faintly of old paper, leather, and something sweeter I couldn't name. A laugh. Childish. Soft. Almost lost in the hum of silence. It bounced lightly between the shelves. I froze, listening. The floor beneath my feet creaked. Books shivered on their ledges. One opened on its own, pages fluttering like wings. No breeze stirred. Windows were shut tight. I stepped forward. Each footfall careful, hesitant. The laughter followed, circling, teasing. I could feel it brushing the back of my neck, though no one was there. Shelves loomed around me, stacked with ancient tomes. Leather spines gleamed faintly in the dim light. I reached out to touch one. The pages rustled under my fingers, though no one held them. Another laugh. Closer. And then, silence. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. Slow, deliberate. Its hands had long stopped, yet it marked the time of the house. I held my breath. The air was thick, heavy with old wood and the faint sweetness of unseen things. The laughter had vanished. Only the soft echo of my own heartbeat filled the quiet. I wandered further, tracing the shelves with trembling hands. Books leaned outward, dust shaking from their edges. A memory seemed to whisper from the spines, fragments of voices I didn't recognize. I paused in the center of the room. The echo of the laughter lingered like a footprint in the air. Soft, fleeting. I could almost smell the faint scent of waxed hair and cold stone. A single page flipped slowly, then fell to the floor. The hush of landing paper sounded impossibly loud. I bent down, fingertips grazing the edge. Nothing else moved. I stepped back. The clock ticked once more, and the library exhaled around me. Soft shadows stretched across the shelves, still and patient. The laughter had gone, but I felt its absence pressing on me. A hollow warmth, like the house was breathing quietly and waiting. I left the room slowly, footsteps muted against the cold wood. Outside, the hallway seemed emptier than before. Yet I could still feel the brush of tiny, unseen eyes. The library remained behind me, silent, watching. The hallway stretched long and narrow, the pale light from the windows spilling weakly across the floor. Dust motes drifted in the quiet, caught in the thin shafts of fading afternoon. The air smelled faintly of varnish and something colder, metallic like frost on skin. The portrait hung at the center of the wall. A family, their faces captured in oil and memory. At first glance, they were still. But when I looked away and back, the faces had shifted, slightly, imperceptibly. The mother's lips curved a fraction. The father's eyes widened just a touch. The children's gazes seemed to tilt toward me, following, patient and silent. I stepped closer. The floor creaked beneath my foot, soft, deliberate. I could feel the cold curling around my ankles, creeping upward like fog. The air itself seemed heavier near the frame. I reached out, fingertips brushing the painted surface. A pulse, a heartbeat. Not mine. Slow, steady, like the quiet insistence of someone waiting. I drew back slightly, trembling. The light shifted and shadows pooled beneath the frame. Each glance away and back revealed subtle changes. A child's eyes blinked once, though the painted lips never moved. The hallway felt longer. My breath hummed quietly in my chest. The walls seemed to lean inward, closing the distance between me and the portrait. The faint metallic scent grew stronger, curling under my nose, and I felt the hairs on my neck rise. I traced the edges of the frame with my fingertips. Cold, smooth, unyielding. But beneath my touch, that slow pulse continued, insistent, as if the portrait were breathing alongside me. I wanted to step back, to look away, but I couldn't. The mother's eyes followed me. A subtle turn of her head, almost human. I blinked, and the movement stopped. Yet the cold lingered, wrapping tight around my shoulders. I moved my hand, just a fraction. The children's gaze shifted with me. The father's jaw clenched, imperceptibly, and a shadow pooled in the corners of the frame. I felt a hum, soft, vibrating through the air, like distant wings brushing the walls. I leaned closer, nose almost against the glass. The heartbeat accelerated, a warning or an invitation. I could see the texture of the paint now, thick and coarse, yet somehow alive. Breath caught in my throat. The hallway grew silent. Even the faint hum of the house had gone. But the pulse beneath my fingertips persisted. Slow, deliberate. I withdrew my hand. The heartbeat slowed. The faces froze again, motionless, but the eyes, they followed me all the way down the hallway, pale and patient, waiting for me to return. I left the hallway. The air relaxed slightly, but a lingering chill clung to my skin. I felt watched. Still, always, the portrait remained behind me, silent. But its heartbeat seemed to echo faintly in the empty space, a soft reminder that some things do not rest. The basement door loomed at the end of the hall, dark and low, its wood swollen with age. I placed a hand on the handle, cold seeping into my palm. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and something older, like stone forgotten beneath the soil. I pushed it open. A creak, long and slow, echoed upward. The hallway behind me seemed to shrink, swallowed in pale light. The basement waited. Steps down the narrow staircase were hesitant, uneven. Each footfall pressed against the old wood, soft, reluctant. Shadows pooled in corners, deep and patient, stretching toward me with each movement. The air thickened, tasting faintly metallic, clinging to my tongue. A whisper, soft, carried on the damp air. My name, just once, then gone. I froze. The basement smelled stronger now. Earth, stone, mildew. Cold pressed against my chest, heavy, making it hard to breathe. I stepped further. Each movement measured, careful. The faint light from the stairwell stretched thin, barely touching the far corners. Shadows flickered, shapes that might have been walls or something else entirely. Another whisper. Closer this time, yet impossible to pinpoint. It carried a weight, soft but commanding. A direction I could not see. A pull I could not resist. I slowed, heart hammering against ribs that felt too tight. The air stilled, thick as fog, as if the basement itself held its breath. The whisper stopped abruptly, leaving silence heavier than stone. I moved forward, drawn by the emptiness. My fingers brushed against the cold wall, damp and rough. The floor was hard beneath my shoes, uneven, pressing upward in places. The scent of earth pressed stronger, deeper, almost choking. Another pause. I listened. Nothing. Just the soft, distant hum of the house settling around me. Yet something watched, patient and silent from the darker corners. I dared a step closer to the far wall. The shadows seemed to lean inward, waiting. I could feel the cold from them, seeping into my coat, curling around my spine. My name hovered in my mind, though the voice had vanished. I held my breath. Nothing moved. The basement was still, yet alive in some way that pressed against my senses. I could hear the faint drip of water somewhere far off, the soft scratch of stone on stone. It was enough to remind me I was not alone. I reached the bottom of the stairs. The darkness seemed thicker here, almost solid. I pressed a hand against the wall, feeling the cold pulse of stone. The whisper did not return. Only the weight of silence and my own shallow breath. I turned back slowly. The stairwell behind me seemed farther away than before. The hallway above dim, distant. The basement had claimed its space around me, patient and enduring. I stepped back toward the stairs. Every movement careful, measured, aware. The shadows did not follow, yet I felt them pressing close, a quiet reminder of what lingered unseen. The whisper might return, or it might wait, forever. The ballroom stretched wide and empty. Moonlight spilled through the tall, arched windows, pale and uneven. The air smelled faintly of wax and dust, thick and still. Above me, the grand chandelier swayed, slowly. Though there was no breeze, crystals caught the light and scattered it across the walls. Patterns stretched and shrank like something breathing. Shadows moved along the edges of the walls, independently of the chandelier's swing. I stepped closer, each footfall soft on the polished floor. The echo seemed swallowed by the room. A low hum pressed in, like the house exhaling through the walls. One crystal detached. It hung motionless in midair, suspended in some unseen hand. I blinked. It fell silently, catching the moonlight for just a moment before striking the floor. A small, sharp clink, like a whisper on stone. I froze. The chandelier continued its slow arc as if nothing had happened. But the shadows shifted, curling toward the floor where the crystal had hovered. I could feel them in my chest, cold and patient. The air felt thicker here, heavier, carrying the faint smell of burnt candle wicks long extinguished. A soft draft brushed the back of my neck, though no windows were open. The chandelier's swing seemed to quicken, imperceptibly, as if sensing my gaze. I moved closer, drawn despite myself. The floor beneath my shoes creaked faintly. Shadows clung to my ankles, retreating only when I stepped back. The pattern of light and dark on the walls twisted like water in a dark pool. Another crystal loosened. It hovered, then spun slowly in the air. The silence around me deepened. My breath pressed loud against the quiet, rasping between my teeth. I dared not reach for it. The room hummed softly, a lullaby I could not understand. Shadows stretched from the chandelier to the corners of the room. They lingered where the crystal had floated, as if marking a space that should not exist. I stepped back toward the center of the room. The swing slowed, settling, yet the shadows lingered. Light flickered across the walls, scattering again, shifting shapes that did not match anything real. The crystal lay on the floor now. Moonlight touched it, and for a heartbeat it seemed to glow faintly from within. The hush of the room pressed around me. Even the soft hum faded, leaving only the whisper of my own breath. I turned to leave. The chandelier swayed gently, shadows curling back toward the corners. The room felt empty, yet charged, aware. The faint, metallic tang of the fallen crystal lingered in the air, clinging to my skin and hair. I walked to the door. Each step echoed, but the shadows did not follow. The light scattered across the walls one last time. And then, silence. The hallway was narrow. Moonlight slipped through the cracked window, pale and thin. The air smelled faintly of old wood and dust. I walked slowly, each step soft against the worn floorboards. The house hummed quietly around me, walls seeming to lean closer with every breath. Then, there it was. A cold breath brushed the back of my neck. Quick, fleeting, like the touch of a ghost. I spun, heart hammering. Nothing. Only the lingering chill crawling along my spine. I took another step. The air pressed colder, heavier. The same breath returned, brushing my neck. Playful, almost mocking. I froze, listening. Silence stretched. Yet the hallway felt alive, aware of me. The faint smell of dampness followed each step. Floorboards creaked beneath my careful pace. The shadows along the walls seemed to lean just slightly toward me. Another brush of cold. I shivered, pulse racing. It knew my path. Each turn I took, it followed, matching, anticipating, invisible. I pressed my hand to the wall, rough and splintered under my fingers. The cold air clung to my skin, sliding down my back, curling into my clothes. A whisper of static, like breath itself, hummed just beyond hearing. I tried to quicken my pace. The breath returned faster, teasing, curling around my hair. I could feel it, almost tasting it, a metallic tang, sharp and faint. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Shadows clung to the corners, flicking with the movement of something unseen. My own footsteps sounded hollow, distant, swallowed by the walls. The chill rose again, closer now, pressing against my shoulders. I froze, heart thudding. It lingered there, patient, unseen, measuring me. A faint rustle from the far end of the hallway. I glanced up. Nothing. The air grew heavier, smelling faintly of earth and smoke. The breath returned, playful, curling against my ear this time. I could not see it, could not fight it, could not move. I exhaled slowly, trying to ground myself. The hallway seemed to pulse with quiet anticipation. Shadows shifted slightly as if sighing, one last brush of cold, gentle, deliberate. It left, retreating down the hall. But the chill remained. I stayed still, heart racing, breath shallow. The house waited around me, silent and knowing. Then I moved again. Step by step, careful, slow. The shadows watched, the air heavy, carrying the memory of that cold, mocking breath. The garden lay in shadows, tangled and overgrown. Moonlight spilled through the broken window, pale and uneven. The air smelled of wet earth and forgotten leaves. I pressed closer to the glass. Something moved among the hedges, slow, deliberate. A pale figure, it stood perfectly still when I stared. Shivering, I could see its outline ripple, though the air was still. Every instinct warned me to retreat, but curiosity pulled me forward. The grass whispered under my feet as I stepped outside. The night was thick, damp with fog curling low along the ground. The figure didn't move, yet the garden felt alive with its presence. I took another careful step. The figure shifted, not like a person, more like mist forming into shape. Its edges blurred, soft and unreal. I inhaled sharply. The scent of wet moss filled my nose. Every leaf seemed to tremble as I approached. I reached the edge of the hedges. It was closer now, pale and silent, like a reflection that shouldn't exist. When I blinked, it stopped, frozen, aware, watching. The ground beneath me was uneven, roots pressing into my soles. The fog swirled around the figure, curling up like smoke. It moved unnaturally, smooth, gliding, almost without weight. I stepped closer again, heart in my throat. A soft hum rose from the air, almost imperceptible. The figure hesitated, then dissolved slightly, fading like mist into nothing. I froze, breath caught in my chest. The fog drifted in pale streams, and the garden seemed impossibly still. Where it had stood, there was only the faint outline of disturbed leaves. A breeze whispered through the hedges, brushing my skin cold. I could smell damp soil, decaying petals, and something faintly metallic lingering. The figure did not return, yet I could feel its gaze from nowhere. I stepped back, hesitant, unsure if I had imagined it. The window behind me reflected my face, pale in the moonlight. I felt watched, though nothing moved. The garden stretched into silence, fog clinging to every hedge and branch. Soft rustling whispered at the edges of my hearing. Every shadow seemed too heavy, too deliberate. I breathed slowly, trying to steady myself. The figure had vanished completely, yet its presence lingered. The air tasted faintly of iron, and my skin still felt brushed by unseen fingers. I turned back toward the house. The broken glass glinted pale light across the grass. For a moment, I thought I saw a faint shimmer in the fog, just beyond reach. Then it was gone. Only silence remained, thick and unyielding, and I walked slowly, feeling the echo of its attention following me, unseen but very real. The guest room smelled faintly of dust and old linen. Moonlight pooled on the floor, soft and uneven. The air was still heavy, almost waiting. The curtains twitched. Just slightly at first. I told myself it was nothing. Shadows pooled in the corners, curling like fingers across the walls. I could feel them brushing the edges of my vision. The room felt smaller, closer, as if it were breathing around me. A soft scratching began on the window. Slow, persistent, rhythmic, deliberate. I approached the curtains cautiously. The fabric moved again, flickering against the pale light. I reached out and pulled them aside. Nothing. Only the glass, cold and still. But the movement continued. The scratching grew a fraction louder, sharper. My pulse thumped in response, loud in the quiet room. The air smelled faintly metallic, and I shivered. I stepped back. The curtains rippled on their own, dancing just out of sync with any breeze. Shadows seemed to lengthen and curl further into the corners. I pressed my hand to the window. It was smooth, solid, unbroken. Yet the sensation of something brushing, something small and deliberate, lingered on my skin. A soft hum seemed to rise from the floorboards. I held my breath. The scratching paused, then resumed, matching an invisible rhythm I could not follow. The curtains twitched again, closer to me now. I could almost hear them breathe, silk brushing silk. The shadows flickered across the walls, slow and purposeful, like they were watching. I stepped back, grounding myself against the cold door frame. The hum receded. The scratches slowed. For a moment, there was nothing. Only the faint metallic tang of the air, the cold pressed against my neck, the restless shadows in the corners. Then a single curtain flicked sharply toward me. I froze. The room remained silent after, yet I could feel its presence. Watching, patient, beyond the window, beyond the glass, beyond sight. I lowered my hand. The shadows lingered, curled tight in their corners. The curtains hung motionless, pale in the moonlight. I sat on the edge of the bed. The room felt impossibly still, and I realized it didn't need to be seen to move me. The scratching never returned, at least not that night. Only the soft, lingering feeling of something close, just beyond reach. And I stayed there, listening, as the house exhaled quietly around me. The bathroom was cold. Moonlight spilled through the frosted window, pale and uneven. Steam rose from the bathtub, twisting slowly in the still air. I stepped closer. The porcelain was icy beneath my fingertips. The faint smell of damp tiles and old soap lingered. My voice echoed, softly at first, bouncing off walls and mirrors. But the words weren't mine. I whispered something, and the sound returned, twisted, warped, repeating phrases I had never spoken. It felt layered, like a memory overlapping a memory. The air hummed quietly around me, dense and thick. The mirrors reflected more than my face. Moments that never happened appeared. Doors closing that I had never opened. Shadows moving where none should be. I blinked, and they shifted. Fleeting and impossible. The faucet dripped. 1 drop, 2. Each echoing through the empty space like a heartbeat I could feel in my chest. I reached to turn it off. Cold water touched my fingers before I even touched the handle. A shiver ran down my spine. The steam thickened, curling toward me in slow, deliberate wisps. I could smell the faint metallic tang of old pipes. The echoes of my voice persisted, layering over themselves, multiplying. I stepped back from the tub. The floor felt slick, though it was dry beneath my feet. The mirrors continued to reflect impossible images, shadows lingering behind them. A soft rustling came from the corner. Nothing moved visibly. but the air shifted, like something had brushed past me. I leaned against the sink. The echoing drip slowed, then stopped. Silence pressed in. The steam dissipated slowly. The mirrors returned to normal, or as normal as they could be in a room like this. But the feeling of being watched, of being mirrored and multiplied, remained. I exhaled quietly. The bathroom smelled faintly of iron and cold porcelain, and I realized I had been holding my breath the entire time. I left the room. The door clicked shut behind me, and in the quiet, I could still hear the echoes of drops lingering in the shadows. The hallway stretched before me. Pale light from a cracked window pooled on the worn carpet. Dust floated in tiny motes, catching faint shadows along the walls. I stepped forward. The floorboards creaked softly beneath my weight. A cold draft brushed my neck, carrying the scent of old wood and damp stone. Each step seemed to take longer than the last. The ceiling rose higher. Doors appeared, then vanished when I blinked. I paused, listening. Footsteps echoed behind me, soft at first, then growing hurried. They didn't match my rhythm. The wallpaper rippled as if breathing. Faded patterns twisted into shapes I couldn't name. A faint hum lingered in the air, just beneath my ears. I turned a corner. Another door, this one narrower, almost too tall to fit. I reached out. My hand passed through emptiness. The footsteps quickened. Soft taps against the floorboards, then pauses as if something was watching me. I could feel their presence pressing close behind, yet invisible. Walls stretched again. The hallway seemed endless now. Light from the window dimmed, slipping into shadows that moved independently. I whispered, asking if someone or something was there. No answer came, only the frantic echo of footsteps. Cold air swirled, carrying the faint metallic tang of old hinges and rust. I retraced my steps. The entrance should have been behind me. It wasn't. The hallway had changed. The doorframe I had walked through earlier vanished entirely. Only walls of peeling paint and warped wood remained. I pressed my hands against the surface, feeling its unnatural smoothness. No texture, no grain, only a void where reality should have been. My breath fogged in the chill, heavy and uneven. I walked further, the floor trembling under a presence unseen. Shadows lengthened toward me, curling along the walls. The hum persisted, rising and falling like a restless sigh. I stopped. Nothing moved, but the hallway had grown longer still. The doors I remembered flickered at the periphery of my vision. Faint, impossible echoes followed each heartbeat. I tried to call out again. My voice returned distorted, hollow, bouncing between walls that didn't exist a moment ago. The footsteps behind me slowed, then ceased, leaving silence thick and suffocating. I realized I was utterly alone. The entrance, the world outside, had vanished. Only this endless, shifting corridor remained. I pressed my palm to the cold wall. It gave slightly pulsing, like the hallway was breathing. A soft rustle brushed past my ear. Nothing there. I took another step. The hallway seemed to stretch further. Light waned, leaving only the pale gray of shadow and the faint scent of dust and iron. I exhaled quietly. My pulse rattled in my ears, and somewhere, just out of sight, the hallway continued to stretch. The foyer felt colder than the rest of the house. Pale light filtered through a cracked window, laying long shadows across the dust-dappled floor. Air lingered thick, almost solid, pressing against my skin. I noticed the clock on the wall. Its face was familiar, ordinary, yet the hands moved backward. Tick-tock, tick-tock, dragging each second like wet wool. The wooden frame smelled faintly of varnish and old smoke. I leaned closer. The numbers blurred, shifting ever so slightly, refusing to stay still. I stepped back. Minutes stretched and folded into one another. Breath caught in my chest, heavy, uneven. The hall seemed to stretch too, bending around the clock. A faint hum vibrated beneath the floorboards. It was low, steady, like the heartbeat of the house itself. When I looked away, the hands jumped forward, resetting. But the pressure remained, coiling around my ribs. Time felt wrong. Slow, thick, unyielding. I reached out, fingertips brushing the cold glass. It shivered under my touch, not quite solid. A faint scent of rust and candle wax drifted upward. Each tick backward echoed differently than a normal tick. Sharper, denser, like the room swallowed sound and spat it back, warped. I swallowed hard, the metallic taste thick on my tongue. I paced slowly, the floorboards groaning under soft footsteps. The clock remained in my peripheral vision. Backward, forward, a loop I could not escape. Shadows shifted with each movement. Pale light from the window fractured along the wall, stretching shapes into long, impossible lines. A shiver traced my spine. I tried to breathe normally. Air felt sticky, clinging to my throat. The hallways outside the foyer seemed quieter, as if even they were holding their breath. I looked back. The hands had returned to their starting point, but the sensation of being watched, measured, counted, did not lift. The hum beneath my feet rose slightly. Static, almost imperceptible, brushed my ears. I felt the house bending time around me, folding moments like paper. I stepped closer again. The pendulum swung, but not in rhythm, backwards, pausing, then rushing, erratic. I shivered, breath shallow. Fingers traced the edge of the clock, cold wood pressing against skin. The room held its weight, heavy and patient like it had been waiting. When I looked away for the final time, the hands jumped again. The minute I had just spent vanished, swallowed into some unseen loop. The oppressive sensation lingered, coiling around my chest like cold rope. I stepped back, silence falling around me. Dust swirled in the pale light. The hallway beyond the foyer seemed normal, yet I knew it wasn't. The clock ticked backward, and the house waited. The child's room smelled faintly of dust and old perfume. Moonlight spilled through the curtains, pale and trembling across the floor. Shadows pooled in the corners, curling into themselves. A small porcelain doll sat on a rocking chair. Its dress was faded, fraying at the edges. I froze. The doll tilted its head as I entered. Eyes glinted in the pale light, sharp, knowing. A soft hum began, barely audible at first, rising slowly. It vibrated through the floor, a low, steady thrum. The walls seemed to pulse in sympathy. I stepped back. The doll rocked slightly, though no breeze stirred. Its hum grew louder, insistent, wrapping around my ankles. I felt the vibration beneath my feet, rising up into my chest. The room smelled faintly sweet, wax and old fabric, tinged with something metallic. I shifted, and the doll's gaze followed. I could feel it pressing quietly against the back of my neck. A rustle from the wardrobe made me flinch. The hum softened, as if waiting for me to move. I stood frozen, heartbeat loud, uneven. I dared a closer step. The doll's head tilted again, ever so slightly, matching my movement. Its eyes glinted like tiny shards of ice. The hum pulsed, vibrating the floor beneath me. I reached out tentatively, fingertips brushing the chipped porcelain. Cold. Hard, unyielding. I stepped back, but the doll seemed to shift subtly in its chair. The hum followed, a wave of sound and vibration. I realized it had been moving with me all along, silently, always aware. A breeze, or something like it, brushed my face. The curtains fluttered, shadows stretching across the walls. The room seemed smaller, tighter, folding around the doll's presence. I crouched slightly, eye level with the porcelain face. The hum rose to a thin, trembling note. I could feel it under my skin, buzzing in my bones. I tried to speak, whisper a name. Nothing answered, only the doll's hum, steady and growing, an unbroken rhythm. The rocking chair creaked softly, in time with the vibration beneath me. The air smelled faintly of wax and damp wood. I could almost taste it, metallic and sweet, lingering on my tongue. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I moved back toward the door slowly. The doll's eyes tracked me, unwavering, the hum pulsing like a heartbeat in the room itself. I dared not blink. I opened the door just a crack. Moonlight fell across the threshold, thin and cold. The hum followed, vibrating the floorboards, insistently patient. I stepped into the hall, heart hammering, breath shallow. The doll's chair was empty in the room behind me, but the soft hum lingered, vibrating faintly, carrying the scent of wax and old fabric into the hallway. I glanced back. Moonlight caught a flash of porcelain eyes in the corner. then silence. The door closed with a whisper. The hallway smelled faintly sweet, touched with cold. I walked away, but the vibration beneath my feet seemed to follow. The hum faded slowly, yet I could feel it in my chest. Always there, waiting, watching. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and dust. Evening fog pressed against the windows, pale and heavy. I stepped cautiously, shoes brushing the worn carpet. The lights flickered. One moment bright, the next a trembling shadow. Shadows stretched along the walls, thin fingers curling toward me. A figure appeared at the edge of a flicker. Tall, motionless, just standing, then gone. The next bulb shivered and the figure moved slightly closer. Or maybe it was my eyes deceiving me. The hallway hummed with silence, thick, almost tangible. I could smell faint ozone, the electrical tang of old wiring. The hum of the house pulsed beneath my feet, subtle, patient. I paused, holding my breath. Shadows stretched and vanished again. The figure appeared on the stairwell landing, then dissolved into the dark corners. I felt eyes, cold, deliberate, tracking every hesitant step. I moved forward slowly. The carpet whispered beneath my weight. The lights danced, flickering rhythmically, as if the house itself breathed. Another shadow lengthened across the hallway. A faint creak of wood followed. I froze. The figure was closer now, always at the edge of the flicker. I could feel its presence pressing against the back of my mind. I blinked. It vanished, leaving only the thin metallic smell of electricity and dust. The silence hung heavier than the fog outside. The light flickered again. For a heartbeat, the figure was there, head tilted slightly, just watching. I felt my chest tighten. I whispered a name into the emptiness. No answer. Only the shifting shadows and soft hum of the house. The hallway seemed to stretch longer with each flicker. Shadows curled along the ceiling, twisting unnaturally. I could almost feel them brushing my shoulders, teasing. The figure appeared once more at the far end. I could see the edges of a pale face, expressionless, unblinking. I stepped back, heart hammering. The light settled for a moment, bright and still. The figure was gone. Only the lingering gaze remained, as if the house remembered where it had been. I moved toward the exit slowly. Each step echoed faintly, swallowed by the thick air. The shadows retreated into corners, still and watchful. The flicker returned once more. A final, brief glimpse of the figure. Then darkness swallowed the hallway completely. I paused outside the hall. The air smelled faintly of burnt dust and cold wood. The house felt alive, patient, deliberate. I walked away. The lights remained still, but I could still feel that gaze, waiting for the next flicker. The hum lingered quietly beneath my feet, soft and endless. The air smelled of old paper and damp wood. Evening light filtered faintly through a crack in the panel. I traced my fingers along the edge, cold and sticky with dust. A hidden door yielded with a soft groan. Beyond it, a small room waited, still and silent. The air felt thick, like water, heavy against my skin. Dust motes drifted in slow spirals. Objects hovered slightly above the floor, as if the room were underwater. A book turned in midair, pages fluttering softly. I stepped in carefully. The floorboards creaked faintly beneath my weight. The whisper came then, low and coaxing, curling around my ears. Stay. It breathed. I froze. The voice was not harsh, but inviting, insistent. A vase drifted toward me, spinning gently, suspended in the air. I could feel a chill brush my arm, subtle, like a sigh. My pulse quickened, though my body seemed rooted in place. The walls were close, lined with shelves heavy with forgotten objects. Every shadow moved imperceptibly, curling toward the center of the room. I felt eyes, countless, unseen, watching my every motion. A faint metallic scent mingled with the musty air. It reminded me of old coins or iron buried too long. I drew my breath slowly, tasting it, the whisper urging me closer. I reached for a floating photograph. It tilted slightly, then rotated back, almost rejecting my touch. A sudden shiver ran down my spine, cold and precise. The whisper grew softer, layered with another sound, static, like distant radio hum. I tilted my head, straining to hear, yet could not place its source. The room seemed to expand, walls breathing, pushing me gently toward the center. A small chair lifted, rocking slowly in midair. Dust fell in spirals from its legs. I could feel it pulling at me, a gentle insistence I could not ignore. I wanted to step back, but my feet felt weighted. Every instinct screamed to leave. Yet curiosity pressed me forward, slow, inexorable. The light shifted, pale and wavering, tracing the floating objects. A mirror leaned in the corner, reflecting not my face, but the room itself, altered, fluid, alive. I blinked, and the reflection pulsed slightly like a heartbeat. I whispered my own name. The room answered with silence heavier than stone. Only the faint hum of the air vibrating softly remained. I placed a hand on the nearest shelf. Objects quivered, as if sensing me, bending the air around them. A cold breath grazed my neck, teasing, playful yet threatening. The whisper came again, delicate, insistent. "Stay!" It was almost melodic, impossible to resist entirely. I stepped back finally, grounding my weight. The room seemed to sigh, the floating objects settling slightly, though still suspended. Dust drifted downward slowly, undisturbed, almost aware. The panel groaned faintly as I moved toward it. I felt a tug, gentle, like water pulling at my feet, but I forced myself forward. One last glance revealed the objects hovering serenely, waiting, patient. I closed the panel carefully behind me. The room vanished from sight, sealed, quiet, untouched. The whisper lingered in my mind, soft as fog. Outside, the hallway smelled of old wood and winter fog. The house was silent again, though I could still feel it watching. I walked on slowly, breath shallow, senses tight, carrying the memory of a room that might never have existed. The night was damp, thick with fog. It clung to the mansion like a heavy blanket, pale and endless. Every breath tasted of mist and cold earth. I stepped outside, shoes muffled against wet stone. Soft footfalls answered me, echoing faintly in the white haze. I paused. The sound shifted slightly, closer, then receded. The fog blurred everything. Shapes hovered just beyond vision, too indistinct to name. I felt them moving with me, always at the edge of sight. The air smelled of wet leaves and rusting iron. A faint static hummed through the fog, prickling my skin. It was as if the mist carried a life of its own. I took another step. The footfalls behind me matched mine, soft and deliberate. No shadow appeared, no figure emerged. Only the echo of movement, patient and quiet. The world shrank in the fog. Walls and hedges swallowed whole. Each step I took seemed to stretch time, lengthening the space around me. The mansion faded into white haze, distant yet looming. A shiver crawled along my spine. I could hear the breath of the fog itself curling around my ears. It whispered with every rustle of unseen branches, every sway of leaves. I strained to see. Shapes flickered, almost human, just beyond clarity. They vanished when I blinked, replaced by empty mist. The footfalls continued, rhythmical and soft. I stopped. They stopped. I moved again. They moved again, mirroring, relentless. The fog thickened, swallowing sound, light, and the faint warmth of my skin. I reached out, trying to touch the world. Only damp emptiness met my fingers, cold and intangible. A faint smell of smoke drifted briefly, though the air was still. The footfalls became a quiet chorus, circling, weaving through the mist. I felt isolated, entirely alone, yet accompanied by something patient. I tried to call, my voice swallowed almost immediately. No echo returned, only a soft, static hum lingering in the air. The fog pressed closer, settling into every crevice of thought. I turned slowly. Nothing but white haze. Yet I knew I was followed, mirrored, tracked. A single damp leaf brushed my arm. The footfalls faltered for a heartbeat, then resumed. I shivered, breath visible, fog curling around each exhale. The mansion loomed dimly behind me, walls pale and indistinct. Every step I took forward, the fog deepened, swallowing the path behind me. I could feel the house watching from within its blurred outlines, patient and silent. I stopped again, heart steadying, senses sharp. The footfalls paused. For a moment there was only silence. Heavy wet waiting, then the fog stirred, a soft rush of air brushing my face. I sensed movement just beyond my vision, fleeting and cold. I walked on slowly, each step absorbed by mist. The footfalls followed, always echoing softly, patient and unyielding. The night held me in its pale, endless embrace. I felt the fog seep into my clothes, my hair, my thoughts. Soft, quiet, inevitable. Eventually I stopped again and listened. The world was only white, only fog, only the echo of patient footfalls fading into distance. The hallway was empty. Moonlight spilled across pale floorboards, cold and thin. I walked slowly, every step muted, breath shallow. Then I saw it. A door in the wall where there had been none before. Wood warped, paint flaking, edges blurred in the dim light. I hesitated. The air smelled faintly of old paper and damp plaster. A soft hum seemed to vibrate through the wall, through my chest. It creaked open, slowly, deliberately, as if aware I was watching. Inside, shadows shifted like liquid, curling along walls and floors. A voice called my name, soft, certain, familiar, yet strange. It made my skin prickle and my stomach twist. I stepped closer. The hallway's cold followed me, mingling with the scent of dust and something sweeter, almost iron. Each step echoed, swallowed, then returned faintly, warped. The shadows inside the doorway moved, independent of light, stretching, bending. I could see shapes fold and unfold, almost human, almost not. Static hummed in the air, pressing against my ears. The voice whispered again. Not a word I recognized, only my name, drawn out, lingering. I felt it in the air, in the floor beneath my feet, like a vibration through the house itself. I stepped in. The doorway closed behind me. I turned, but the wall was solid, flat, unbroken. Shadows danced around me, slow and fluid. They leaned closer, paused, then receded, always at the edge of vision. I could feel them brushing the air around my arms, cold, insubstantial. The room smelled faintly of smoke and wet stone. A soft rustle moved across the floor, though nothing touched it. My own heartbeat drummed too loudly, echoing against unseen walls. I tried to call out, but the voice answered me first. Not louder, softer, an intimacy that made my skin crawl. It spoke nothing but pulled at the edges of thought, tugging curiosity and dread alike. The light from the hallway never came. Yet pale shapes flickered in the corners, fleeting and impossible to hold. I reached for one, fingers brushing empty air, nothing but cold and quiet. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes dripped slowly, viscous, pressing against my ribs. The shadows moved with patience, circling, waiting, bending the space around me. I realized I was alone, and not alone. Simultaneously both. A soft breath brushed my neck. I spun, nothing there, only the whisper of air. The voice murmured again, low, coaxing, just beyond comprehension. I wanted to turn back. The door had vanished entirely. No seam, no hinge, nothing to mark where reality ended and this room began. The shadows slowed, pooling into the corners. Static hummed faintly, a lullaby and a warning. I could feel the air pressing closer, expectant, patient, infinite. I took a step forward. Then another, each one swallowed by the room, by the fog of shadow and silence. The voice lingered, soft, coaxing. The room seemed to breathe around me. I understood I had crossed into something else, something quiet, deliberate, unhurried, and then nothing moved. The shadows rested. The air held its breath. I stayed listening. The door did not return. Only my name repeated faintly, softly in the quiet, curling through the stillness, waiting. The grand hall stretched before me, pale light pooling across cold stone floors. Shadows leaned long, heavy, curling over the edges of furniture. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and dust, thick and still. I sat alone, or so I thought. The echoes of whispers, soft footsteps, and fleeting figures had faded, leaving a calm too deliberate to be natural. My fingers traced the edge of the marble table. It was cold, solid, real. Yet the air itself seemed to pulse gently, like the mansion's breath, slow and measured. I listened. Nothing moved, and yet everything hummed. The silence wrapped around me, dense and soft, pressing against my ears and chest. The shadows shifted almost imperceptibly. A curtain trembled. A draft passed along the floor, carrying the faint scent of old paper and smoke. I realized I had stopped noticing the empty rooms, the narrow hallways, the doors that weren't there. The house had slowed with me. Each breath I drew seemed to settle into the space, quieting the hum of distant rooms. I was not alone. I felt it first as a presence, pale and patient, brushing the edges of thought. Soft footsteps lingered just beyond sight, circling. Careful, I did not turn. I let the hall settle around me. The tension loosened, replaced by a quiet pulse that was both comforting and impossible. A distant door closed. A soft rustle ran across the floorboards. A candle guttered somewhere far away, spilling pale light that danced along the walls. The house exhaled. It was a slow, deliberate sigh, carrying the weight of years and shadows. I matched it, letting my own breath fall in time with the calm rhythm of the hall. The presence shifted closer. Not threatening, only patient. It circled, brushing the edges of my awareness, a reminder that I was part of this space, as much as it was part of me. I closed my eyes. The echoes of fear, curiosity, dread, they had all softened into a dull, distant hum. I felt the silence embrace me, wrapping around my shoulders. Settling in my chest, I was aware of the shadows stretch, the faint creak of floorboards settling, the gentle hum that vibrated through the walls. The mansion seemed to watch quietly without judgment. It waited, patient and eternal. I realized I had never been alone. Not truly. Even in the darkest corners, even when whispers called and doors shifted, something had always been there. A pale breeze drifted through the high windows. Dust motes floated like tiny lanterns in the light. Soft footsteps receded, fading into the rhythm of the hall's calm pulse. I exhaled, slowly, deliberately. The hall did not echo. The shadows did not flinch. I stayed seated, letting the hush wrap around me. It was not warmth, not comfort. It was something subtler. A recognition, a quiet companionship with the stillness. Time held no meaning here. Minutes stretched, folded, vanished. Yet I felt anchored, tethered gently by the house itself, by the quiet pulse beneath the stone and wood. I opened my eyes. Shadows leaned, long and soft, but they no longer threatened. They watched, patient. I watched back. I was aware of every creak, every whisper that no longer came. The house breathed, and I breathed with it. Alone, yet never alone, the calm settled deeper. It pressed softly against my skin, filled my lungs, hummed through my blood. I understood then, with a strange clarity, that the house had always been patient, waiting for me to notice its quiet rhythm. I stayed. And it stayed with me, and in the embrace of silence I felt something like peace,